Jimmy, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Really delighted to be speaking with you today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. We've been chatting off air. You know, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Jamie, to kick off, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Well, for me, I mean, everything that I do is about energy, passion, and compassion. So that's how I live. You know, they're the three values I live my life by, and also what I do whenever I'm either starting a business, invest in a business, or I'm involved in growing a business. So, you know, that for me, there has to be more to business than simply making money. But we should not forget, for some people, making money is their purpose. So, you know, I grew up in a very poor environment in Bethnal Green above a shop. And when I was 16, 17, my purpose was to become rich, to become wealthy and not poor. And we shouldn't shy away from that. We should celebrate that. That is some people's sole purpose, and that's okay.
I love that. Energy, passion, and compassion. Yeah, look, I've first heard you at the SME Expo in London, and I was really impressed by how you articulated the scaling and exiting process. So I want to get into that today. I made an assumption about your background, and then I went and did a little bit of digging, and it was the opposite of what I had concocted in my own head. So for those, Jamie, who are listening today who aren't aware of your background, can you give us the abridged version of that and how you arrived to then write the book Unsexy Business?
Yeah, well, thanks for that opportunity. I mean, the reality is people always think I've got a different background because of the way I now speak. But, you know, if I let you know that it took me months and thousands of hours of practice in how I changed the way I speak, because I grew up with a very deep Cockney accent. And the reality was, then, you know, I left school in 1996, age 16. If you had a Cockney accent, you couldn't do business with people because they just assumed you were going to steal from them. So you had to change the way you spoke. In today's world is a lot more accepting. But let me give you a bit of a brief background. So I grew up in Bethnal Green, East London, 2-bedroom flat above a shop where my mother lived right up until she passed in 2014. My mum and dad both worked, but, you know, we didn't have much, but we also had everything. We had a loving family, and that was wonderful. I was severely dyslexic, which meant that at school I was considered thick, disruptive, and all of the other things that you can be brushed with. And that was because simply dyslexia wasn't understood, and I was in the state school system. So I hopped around secondary schools. I went to 3 different secondary schools, which was not that helpful. At age 16, I left before sitting any exams because well, I simply knew that I wouldn't be able to pass any. And I went straight into the business world and started working for myself. I set up a window cleaning round, just went knocking on people's doors. I employed about 5 people there in the first year, sold that in the back of a classified newspaper for £6,000, used that to buy some cars, set up a car sales yard. And then about 2 years into that, run out of money. That wasn't going too well. And I stumbled across the world of debt collection. And I became a self-employed debt collector. And the reason I did that is I grew up in Bethnal Green. I was always able to look after myself. I was great with, I was a Cockney boy, so I was great with the patter. And I saw debt collection as really a bit of a salesman job. You know, if you could sell to people, then you could get them to part with money for something they don't want, which is typical of any car salesman, really. And I did that for about 8 months when I realized the reality was these people were employed by governments and the banking sector to pretty much terrorize people. And I just couldn't get my head around it. And it was horrible. And I made a decision: I either leave or I change it. And I made the difficult decision to change it. So I set up my first debt collection company, which went down terribly with the competition. To give you an idea, I was held hostage at gunpoint at some stage in my career. I was stabbed in my shoulder, which was considered to be a competitor outside my house in East London. But I had complete determination to clean up the debt recovery industry, which I did all the way from year 2000 until 2016, when I sold that company for upwards of £40 million. And then straight after that, I divested into tech, and I've owned a number of tech businesses since. And I now own a tech and an advisory business that's based in the UK, US, and Australia. And I have 13 other investments through my private equity vehicle that I set up called Firestarters. And just to finish off, as you said, and in that process, I wrote a book called Unsexy Business, which is how traditionally you don't need to have a brand new idea. You don't need to reinvent the wheel to be a successful entrepreneur. You can simply take a concept that's already done and make a change to it and do it better, or do it differently, or do it cheaper. And that is sometimes a better option than taking the risk of trying to invent the next Facebook or the next electric car.
My word, there is so many ways we could go here on this, and I would like to get into how the challenges that you had scaling and then subsequently exiting, and what triggered the decision to do that. But before I do that, going right back, you mentioned, your identity was of someone who was Cockney, who spoke a certain way, who was from a certain, part of the city. How important, because you mentioned at the outset of your book, scaling a business isn't just about the sexy headlines and exciting moments. It's about embracing the unglamorous, often tedious work that goes on behind the scenes. And just referencing that tedium, you made a decision of deliberate practice to change your belief system, to change your identity, and in many respects change, we'll get into this, but changing your mindset. How important has mindset been to actually you successfully scaling and doing what you're doing now?
I mean, hugely important. One thing I should say is, I'm now 44. I have a family and 2 children and a wife, and I'm disappointed in myself that I made those changes, but they were absolutely vital. I lost my identity. It's quite funny, occasionally people say to me, I'll be in the pub with some friends and they'll be like, "Jamie, talk Cockney," and I'll be like, honestly, it's like asking me to talk Indian. It would just be rude.
Yeah.
It would be rude for me to attempt it, because it's not that this is an accent that I'm putting on. This is an accent that I genuinely changed to, and this is me now. So that hurts me a bit, because I go and visit my brother, as I did this weekend, and we went to Bethnal Green, had some pie mash, which is a typical state. It's our dietary for Bethnal Green. And I speak very differently, and that was hard, and it's been hard for me to accept. But I absolutely knew that the mindset part of it was that this is what is required. I could not turn up at a government organization and convince them to appoint me as one of their suppliers having the accent that I did. So I had to change, and I had to just be very strict with that. Against all odds, my mum, my brothers, my sisters, and my friends were like, "Why is he doing this?" But I knew that it was for my own purpose. I wanted to live a different life than the one that I grew up in. I wanted to have money. I wanted to have a car. I wanted to have a house with a garden. So I had to focus on that. And I've done that throughout my career on various other things. So, I mentioned earlier when I left school without sitting a single GCSE. Later on in life, I really wanted to do an MBA. I don't know why, and I guess it was to prove to myself that I could. But I rocked up at the London Business School. I thought if I wanted to do an MBA, I wanted to do it at one of the best business schools in the country. So I applied to the London Business School. And obviously you can't do an MBA unless you've already got a degree. It's a postgrad. And I turned up with some A3 boards, and I'd put together a presentation, and I convinced them on why it would be a good idea for LBS to take on their first person without a single qualification for an executive MBA. And I did that. And again, it's just that mindset. I was like, I want to do an MBA. I'm not going to go and resit my GCSEs, A levels, and get a degree. I'm going to have to try and convince a business school, one of the best business schools in the world, that it would be great for their own brand to show that you could take somebody that's clearly bright as an individual with business acumen and allow them to do an MBA regardless of their academic past. And I've been like that throughout my life on a number of things. Actually, this morning, I'm in the process of buying a new home, and I've got just behind the screen here, I've got a whiteboard up, and I've got Post-its everywhere on the pros, the cons, and et cetera, et cetera. So I take that approach. That's very single. We've got to come to a conclusion here. What are the facts on everything I do?
Yeah, I find that fascinating. We were speaking earlier, and you mentioned your dyslexia. What can we learn for those of us who don't have the condition about the condition that actually really augments what we're trying to do in the context of business. You know, quite a number of dyslexic entrepreneurs have gone through our own program, and they think differently. They look at the world through a different lens, and I feel we've all a lot to learn from that, to see things from a different perspective. What do you feel, given kind of you're operating in a largely neurotypical environment? Share with us the magic which is dyslexia that we can bring into our world.
I mean, it's great that you are. So I'm in the process of writing my second book, The Dyslexic Entrepreneur, which will be out later this year before Christmas. But I've been fortunate enough in that process that I've just sat down with Duncan Bannatyne, I've just sat down with Theo Paphitis, I've just sat down with Kelly Hoppen, I just sat down with Richard Branson, and I've been talking to these people about dyslexia, so I can talk with some confidence on this matter. And the reality is, what you're seeing with dyslexic thinking is that people with dyslexia do seem to block out a lot of the noise. So where most people would say there's an opportunity here, and then kill themselves with data and the noise around that, you know, well, it might not work. What if they don't like it? But would it appeal to this person? Would it appeal to that person? What dyslexic people tend to do is go, what does my gut tell me? Let's give it a go. So what they tend to do is they start a lot more businesses, which means that they have genuinely more failures, but they also have more successes. And what you see with dyslexic people is they tend to not just have one business, they tend to have multiple businesses, because they're really good at delegating. And they're obviously good at delegating because they simply are unable to do certain tasks themselves. So they have to become good at delegating. And what I'm finding in the interviews that I'm doing for this book, and it became the subtitle of the book, which came after we had already started interviewing some people, which is, the subtitle is, and what can you learn from thinking differently? So what we are trying to convince people is, one, that dyslexia should not just be seen as a negative. In fact, it's a superpower. But for those without dyslexia, should you consider employing somebody purposefully that does have dyslexia because of the benefits that they bring? And I believe that that is a fact, and that should be considered. And I hope that later on this year, when the book is published and that message goes out, that when people are sat around a table business planning, they're going, okay, so I'm going to need somebody to look after finance. Okay, I'm going to need someone to look after HR. And I hope that in those discussions, they'll be saying, okay, and maybe I want a dyslexic thinker to be by my side to cut through some of the noise and help me think differently.
You're doing a wonderful service to the business community by writing this book. I read a lot, and I haven't come across a book as you've described. I think I'm really looking forward to actually reading that, and hopefully you'll be game to come back onto the show. So look, what I've heard there, and how I articulate that, or how I process that in my own head, is that you're very gut driven. Essentially, you listen, you drown out all of the other noise, filter out all of the other noise, and you really tune into, let's call it your muse, that inner voice. Which, when I think of the inner voice, I'm thinking of, you know, I've been practicing meditation for years in an attempt to drown out the noise and really listen to that inner voice. And it sounds like you guys have this intuitively, you have this naturally, which is wonderful. You talk about the importance of delegating as well. As a result of the superpower that you have, you instinctively know how to leverage others' talents who are, let's say, more neurotypical. And what else have you learned as a result of this superpower? And in the context of scaling a business, must you do as a business leader in order to successfully scale?
So, I mean, without a doubt, delegation is the most important. But, you know, we've touched base on that. If you can't delegate, you cannot scale, just quite simply. And even if you do manage to scale, you can't sell, right? And I tend to think of businesses in 3 stages, which is start, scale, and sell. And most people, certainly UK entrepreneurs, are quite sales focused. So delegation is hugely important. But I think one of the one of the most important things for me was admitting that I had dyslexia. So what most dyslexic people tend to do is that they try to hide it.
Yeah.
So another thing that I'm discovering in some of the interviews that I'm undertaking is a lot of us have deliberately completely messed up our ability to write neatly, because for many years it suited us to write in a scruffy manner to hide what we may have been spelling incorrectly. So now we all write like doctors writing prescriptions, where in fact our handwriting was never the issue, it was our spelling, but we purposefully did this to ourselves. And that was all because the case that we were unable to just go, I'm having an issue here. Now, a lot of us, because of age, you couldn't have sat up and said that anyway, because it was just misunderstood. But actually, we're seeing this in some younger entrepreneurs too. People still tend to try and hide it for as long as humanly possible. But when you come out and say, I'm dyslexic, everybody just accepts it, right? Now, occasionally you get the not so intelligent person on social media that will correct you because you've misspelt a post or something like that. And don't get me wrong, Brendan, that is still hurtful. It is as hurtful today as it was when I was 9 years old, when someone picks me up on the way I spell something. And I do think I've got another thing that I live my life by. We need to be more kind to people. We're all human and we all need to be more kind. And we should all think before we criticize someone, either in person or on social channels, about their spellings or something that they're doing. But admitting my dyslexia, and for others that I've spoken to, admitting their dyslexia has made them grow by 4 inches taller, because it gave them their confidence to think differently and go, well, this is me. And that, without doubt, is the most powerful thing we can do to any dyslexic person. And the sole reason that I will write this book is to make sure that anybody that has dyslexia starts to see it through the lens of a superpower rather than a negative thing that they have to live with.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And at this stage, I'm going to give a shout out to a wonderful entrepreneur, Martin Mackay, who has founded and now leads an amazing company called Text Help, who have developed software to aid those who do not learn in a conventional way, especially those with dyslexia. And he's actually now, he won the Irish Entrepreneur of the Year, and he's now been shortlisted for the World Entrepreneur of the Year. An amazing guy with an amazing company doing amazing things for those who are challenged with learning, because ultimately what you've touched on is about a belief system. You know, there's so many out there, whether they have dyslexia or they've come from, a minority background or do not consider themselves entrepreneurial, who have a belief system that is ultimately holding them back. You found, once you stepped out of this kind of, I almost see you unzipping this suit that was chaining you in and stepping out and going, this is me and I have this superpower. What other beliefs do you feel, Jamie, did you have to change in order to successfully scale and ultimately exit for a wonderful value? Can you speak to other beliefs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for me, it is all about confidence. It's about knowing that you can do it, because in every entrepreneur's journey, just the getting started is of course it's challenging, but by the challenges just keep coming at you over and over and over again. And one of the things I'm really pleased with in my own adult life is that I love learning. I'm a lifelong learner now. So and you meet a lot of entrepreneurs that haven't quite got there yet, and I think if we can get them there as quickly as possible, that is a great thing, because the ability to be able to undertake a course on anything these days is just wonderful. But you have to believe that you can learn. You have to believe that you're going to get something from that course. One of the things that was a game changer in my own career was I went and did a course at Cranfield called the Business Growth Program. Now, I went and looked at the Business Growth Program in 2006. I undertook the program in 2010. It took me 4 years to convince myself Now, it wasn't because of the £15,000 fee. It was because I was not convinced that I would learn something, that it would add value. And it's so strange because I follow my gut on so many other things. I should have just done it. It was 15 grand. What have I got to lose? When I undertook the course, I left Cranfield a few months later with this newfound confidence that I could achieve anything. And a few months after that, I went and did a joint venture with Deloitte. And ultimately, I grew my business over the next 4 years from sort of £400,000 loss making to 3 million quid's worth of profit, because I had the belief in myself that I'm not a complete entrepreneur. And I think a lot of us make that mistake too. A lot of entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time surrounding ourselves with other entrepreneurs. And we sit in rooms and we sit in bars and we tell each other about how we've got it all covered, and we give advice. What we do less of is we do less of asking for advice and going, well, I'm not too sure about this. And I think, that's getting better because of podcasts like this and learning programs available. But we must believe that we are not the complete thing, because if we believe we're the complete thing, we're likely to either tread water or progress at a very slow rate. We have to believe that there is more to learn, if not from others, through courses, but a life that's full of learning is just a beautiful life, right? So undertaking a program for anything, and it doesn't have to be to do with business, but you've got to believe that you can do it. And that if you're going to come across obstacles on that journey, that there is a way to teach yourself or employ that expertise in to achieve it. So a good example right now is, you cannot go 10 minutes without hearing somebody talk about AI. And it's getting hugely frustrating, right? Because not many people actually know what it is, but everyone's got it on. I think I listened to an interview with I think it was Tim Cook or someone the other day who mentioned AI 17 times in 20 minutes or something. It's getting ridiculous. But we can't all now go and spend the next 95% of our waking hours learning about AI, right? But what a lot of us can do is go, I'm going to employ somebody that's already been looking at this for the next 2 years and bring them in to stand by my side to teach me about AI, or make sure that I'm aware of all the opportunities that exist in AI while I catch up. And again, it's that belief system that you can achieve anything. Not all of us have got the resource to buy it in, but we do have time. And people say I don't have time. I get up an hour earlier, right? I sleep for 5-6 hours a night. If I need to sleep for 3 hours for a few nights to get something done, then I'll do that. You can find time. We all spend far too long on these things, sending messages and telling them what we're up to. So there's plenty of time. Believe in yourself and believe that there is always an answer out there, and you will achieve anything you put your mind to.
Yeah, so much of that resonates, and I always believe any challenge that you encounter, don't think of it as a how challenge. Think of it as a who challenge. Too often we get buried down the rabbit hole of trying to learn how to do something, whenever actually, if we leverage our networks and be humble enough to say, I don't know how to do this, but actually this person over here does. Let's engage with that person, and just I spent a week in Croatia at an entrepreneurs retreat last week. AI came up in every single talk. I listened to an incredible Italian guy, actually a really interesting guy who has a PhD in artificial intelligence coupled with a PhD in psychedelics. He's done 150 different psychedelics. Basically, what I learned after 90 minutes of a lot of stuff going over my head, we're all pretty much screwed, because AI is going to do everything for us, which is going to kind of strip us of any meaning and purpose. So we've got to do lots of psychedelics to actually enter a new mindset. Or there was a couple of professions left which required empathy, which he said, well, the robots will never do, and that's to be a nurse or a social worker. So
it's quite scary data, right? So I listened to a podcast the other day where it's believed that ChatGPT 5 will be twice as intelligent as Einstein was. And that in 4 months it will be up to 250 times more intelligent.
Yeah.
So that is pretty crazy.
Absolutely. And for many of us, I mean, we haven't touched artificial intelligence or chat GBT on the podcast. Really, at this, there are I suppose, too many predictions. I feel there's a lot of doom and gloom out there about it. But for me, it's anchored again in a purpose to scale with purpose, having a vision to scale with purpose in whatever you do, so that actually you're leveraging these technologies for the good.
Oh yeah.
So a couple of things you spoke to there were the challenges and the importance, the resilience that you've shown throughout your entire entrepreneurial journey. Can you share with our listeners, Jamie, some of the things, maybe let's get super practical here, some of the practices that you've embedded in your life to develop a resilient mindset? I always talk about, the importance of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Does that resonate with you? And are there things that you've done in your life to really develop a thicker skin to achieve what you've achieved?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I should point out, and I'm a very strong believer on this, that you must look after yourself first.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you can't look after yourself, how on earth are you going to look after your business? And that's not just for you; that's for your partners, your staff. You should always be thinking about that. So, I'm addicted to exercise. I exercise 7 days a week. And, I do CrossFit, but I also walk. I also take a lot of time out. Actually, I told you I was brainstorming on this new property purchase before our call. So I've got all that up on the wall. But after this call, I've got scheduled to go for a 1 hour walk before I go back to it, to try and come to my conclusion. And these things, I know that the world is quite busy with self-care and health tips and stuff right now, but you really cannot underestimate the value of staying fit and healthy and giving yourself some space and walking. I fell in love with walking a few years ago, and I wish I would have fallen in love with it 20 years ago. It is one of the most powerful things ever. I'm on crutches at the moment. I had a foot operation on Monday, but getting out for 5K on my crutches is a great workout. I'm getting the headspace. So that looking after yourself is obviously number one. But one of the most important things I learned, and right in the thick of business, when things weren't going that great and we were starting to make a turn, and again, you cannot not underestimate the power of this, and that is sleeping on decisions. People told me this.
Yeah.
People told me this 100 times. But when I was 18, 19, 25, and I was sleeping for 4 hours a night, and I was running at 100 miles an hour, and I was still working out, and I was drinking, and I was working, for some reason, I thought it was just the thing older people tell you, that you should sleep on things. It's one of those things old people say. But the power of it is unreal in every decision, So that's the big one for me. I love sleeping on decisions. And you know what? I find nothing more powerful than when somebody asks me to make a decision on something, for me to sit there and go, I'm going to sleep on it and come back to you. Yeah. The power in that, it makes you come across as thoughtful. It makes you come across that they can trust you, that you're going to make a good decision. That doesn't always need to be on an internal one. It could be that a potential client's going to you, well, look, I'll only do this deal if you do the contract for 2 years rather than your standard 4. If you say to the client, I can hear you, I need to go away and sleep on it, I'll come back to you tomorrow morning, let's meet for a coffee, etc., etc. The power of that is huge, and you're definitely, without a doubt, going to make a better decision.
Yeah, everything you're saying strongly resonates. I'm a huge believer in lead self first before you lead others, before you lead an organization. Those who've been listening to the podcast for some time know that and it's our approach in our own program. We spend a lot of time actually coaching around the importance of self-leadership. It's the enabler for everything else. It's the enabler for, the healthy, close relationships amongst your team, and ultimately the success of the organization. Huge believer in that. We could do a podcast, lots of podcasts on that on its own. The sleeping on decisions, what you described is very powerful. There's another side to that, just for the listeners, and I found this has been very useful in the past is if you feel compelled, if you've received a piece of information in typically by email and you feel compelled to kind of get in there and kind of react to it straight away, I've often found the 24-hour rule is very powerful. Write the email if you wish, save it in your drafts. I've never had a situation where I've come back in 24 hours and not changed the draft or not sent it at all. So I think there's wisdom, deep wisdom in everything you're saying. And actually go back to, the point, as I get older, I'm 48 now, you're 44, Jamie, you mentioned. As I get older, I realize actually the wisdom in those old cliches that we just threw away from, their parents said, kind of rolled our eyes at them. And, but
I must just share this quick story with you. Sorry,
go for it.
So I'm trying to do a deal at the moment with a very large PLC across the globe. Actually, I wrote the letter to them of the sort of last final. Here's the deal. Let's go ahead and do it on Tuesday of last week. It's now Monday the following week. I'm planned in my head to send it on Wednesday this week. I've revisited it twice. I will revisit it again tomorrow, and I will revisit it again on Wednesday. If you would have told my younger self that you are going to spend 8 days to write an email to someone, I wouldn't have believed it. But it's the right thing to do. And I've edited it very so slightly on each occasion that I pick it up. But when I send it on Wednesday, it will be complete and it will be right. But the power, it takes a lot of discipline to do this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Just picking up on that, what else have you learned that now at 44 that you wish you'd have known at 24?
Well, definitely, we mentioned earlier on about the compassion, right? So, if I did an interview recently where someone said, that cliche question of what would you tell your sort of 18-year-old self? And my response to that was quite simply to be more kind, because there have been times in my career that I have run in a direction regardless of what that meant, and as a mature adult now with a family and a different mindset, I'm a little bit embarrassed with that, actually, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. So we should be more kind to each other. We should be a bit more thoughtful along this journey. We're gifted to be involved in this thing called entrepreneurship, right? Some people have got to go to work every day in a job that they might not enjoy, being told what to do every second of the day, when to turn up, when not to turn up. We have a gift, and we shouldn't use that as some sort of stamp of authority, of power. We should use that for good, and try and be a bit calmer, a bit nicer on this journey.
I love that. The wise words, and it's a thread that comes up. I'm almost at 100 episodes now. It's a thread that comes up time and time again. We'll come to our close and our timeless takeaways, and this features a lot. Getting kind of super practical now in terms of the how-to. We haven't, I think I mentioned at the outset, we haven't spoken specifically to exits in the context. We've had those who've been involved in the world of private equity, but we haven't had someone who has been there and done it multiple times. Let's kick off. We can go in whichever direction you wish, but let's kick off. At what point do you make the decision that you're going to let go of your baby? That, and something for a lot of entrepreneurs is actually their identity is personally wrapped up in. So actually to consciously think of actually letting this go is going to be incredibly difficult. And I know people who are holding on by their fingernails when you're looking from the outside in. And the right thing to do now is to let someone else take that in the next chapter of its life. So maybe speak to the point in which you kind of decided that it's time for me to step back. It's time for me to move on and sell this. And then we'll get into the kind of the how to of selling successfully.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing with this, I was quite fortunate that I knew that I was getting to a stage where I wasn't the best person to run the business, So we were nearly a couple of hundred people and about 3.5 million quid's worth of EBITDA, and I wasn't enjoying it anymore.
Right.
Being an entrepreneur went from the exciting, selling and building to managing, and I came to the conclusion that that if I sold for a multiple of 10 to 15, that would be enough, and I would go and focus on something different. So I was very fortunate that I came to that conclusion. I think it was a bit easier for me because I grew up with nothing. Yeah. And all of a sudden I'm faced with, well, I could sell for 40 million quid. It's like, well, do I really want to hold on any longer? If I had nothing, I've now got 40 million, this will do, sort of thing. But one of the things I've realized since is that I love the startup phase. So I sold that first business. I set up another 6 days later. I sold that business. I then set up another, and I've set up another since. So I'm actually on my fifth startup, but I'm my fourth successful startup. One of them I closed down early because it was just the right thing to do. So I know in myself that I'm the startup guy. I know that I build businesses to around 50 million quid in value. I sell them, and that gives me a strong purpose in life. I love that bit of it. I love bringing people together. I love the scrappy fighting, the competition part of it, but I don't really enjoy it thereafter. But that's not easy to come to that conclusion, right? Because it means I wouldn't have come to that conclusion unless I would have sold my first one. So I had to take the risk of selling my first one. One thing I will say, and it's a title of another book that I want to do at some stage, which is life after exit is not that great for many people. So I've got many friends that have sold their businesses and they now live a life where they're struggling to find purpose. A great chap at Cranfield University called Mark Kelly once said to me, Jamie, don't ever become rich and irrelevant. And he went on in that story to say, you can't sell your business and then turn up at every networking event telling people what you once did, because nobody cares. They only care about what you're doing right now. So you either exit and become wealthy and find something completely different to do, or you start again, or you don't exit. So I wouldn't take that decision lightly, because a life without purpose is a really, really, really miserable life when you've lived a life full of purpose as an entrepreneur, because your purpose has been solely, for many people, the business. And it's okay. Most of us think, well, when I sell, I'll focus more on my golf, or I'll focus more on my family. Let me be honest with you. Nothing will replace the purpose of getting up in the morning and fighting for your business. We all like to think that cuddling our children and rolling around on the grass will fill that space, but it won't. It doesn't. So you really do need to think about that. And I talk from experience, because I struggled with it. I struggled with it also. So having that strong purpose, I think you've got a plan for your exit. Many years ago, actually, my father-in-law was a CFO at GSK, and 18 months before he retired, they gave him a retirement coach. And he spent 18 months meeting with this person weekly, and they planned for what he would do post-retirement. Now, he's living a great life, but he spent 18 months planning it. How many entrepreneurs spend 18 months planning what they might do after selling their business? We just assume it's going to be okay because we've got millions in the bank. Of course, it's going to be okay. And by the way, you can't complain. You can't sell and end up in the Sunday Times saying, I sold my business for 40 million quid. And then 2 months later, be down the pub and say to your friends, I'm feeling like I've lost my purpose. It doesn't go down very, very well. 40 million pieces of paper are supposed to mean that you don't have any reason to complain. Get on with it.
Yeah, there's very few people going to empathize with that situation.
So just a snapshot is you've really got to think, but know where your strengths are, because and have confidence that you can do it again. If you really love the startup bit, then sell it and start again. You might not succeed the first time, but you'll succeed the second or the third. Get going. One of the great things about selling is you have resource, you have money, which most of us didn't get first time round. Most of us had to really fight for that. So, but I'm a strong believer on try and work out and talk to others. Where are my qualities? And by the way, it's not hard to work it out. Where did you have most fun? Right? That's your answer. And if you're not having fun managing it when it's a certain size, then either try and employ people to manage it and take a step back, but that's really difficult, or sell it and do another. Do another.
Oh, I encourage people to replay the last 5-10 minutes again and again. There's so much in this. I just want to recap for people before we get into the how-to of successfully exiting and getting into the good thing of the good fun of multiples and all of that good stuff. But what I heard was ultimately you discovered that your unique ability was as the startup guy. And it's interesting, as you're speaking to me, you literally light up when you're talking about startups. Your body language changes. You're much more animated. And I would encourage people, if they're querying what is their unique ability, ask people to take time. This is where a coach is invaluable, because a coach will ask great questions and will discern your body language to understand when you light up, and often the clue is in that in terms of finding your unique ability. So understand what your unique ability is. You're the startup guy, not the scale up guy. You had a number is what I heard. You knew that if I reach this number, it's time for me to go, because this is absolutely fair value for ultimately my effort in this. And it's time to, if I realize this number, then it's time for me to walk away. The importance of, not being rich and irrelevant. And this speaks to something I heard Condoleezza Rice talk about years ago. And she said, "Don't be the former anything." As you said, don't rock up at the party and say, "Well, I'm the former founder," or "I'm the former CEO." So that really resonated, and the understanding that ultimately, I kind of put words around this as I understand this. The money gives you a level of psychological freedom that frees up now this, really allows you to think about the purpose in the next stage of your life whenever it's not about the money as such. So that was a wonderful. Again, I encourage people to re-listen to this, because there's so much in this. Kind of a wonderful summation of why sell. So let's get into now how to sell, Jamie, in terms of realizing let's step through the process and how, for those who are considering it, how can they realize the maximum value for their efforts?
Yeah, well, and this is something I talk to a lot. So a lot of people say you can never start too early. They say start a business with the end in mind, etc. I'm not there entirely. I think you need to start a business thinking about how to survive the next week, the next month, how to beat the competition, how to win at any cost. But when you do think that you are forecasting to get to an event that might be the right number, so, what are the industry multiples? Well, I'm going to be there in 18 months' time. Then I do think you do need to start roughly around 18 months before you intend to exit. Now, you might exit sooner, but you do need to, 18 months is a good rule. I've got a business that's trading here and in Australia. And we have started that process in the last month. We don't intend to sell towards the end of 2024, but we've started that in the last month. And what does starting it mean? It means communicating it, telling the people that matter, right? So that people are on the journey with you, so that they're not going, why is everything changing? Why is he asking all these weird questions all of a sudden? So to choose who that group is that you're going to take on that journey.
Just to pick up on that, Jamie, some people listening will say, well, if I communicate to people, my leadership team, now all of a sudden I've created a level of concern about what's next, and if Jamie goes, things are going to be different, and all of a sudden, the concern might be that your leadership team, who are going to be part of the value that an acquirer is going to make a decision on, potentially leave. What would you say to that?
Well, the reality is that any potential acquirer is going to meet your leadership team anyway during the buying
Yeah.
process. And if they're meeting them and they're like a rabbit in headlights going, I didn't know anything about this. Actually, I'm not too sure if I'm going to stay anyway, then you're for sure going to make a lot less money. So take the 18 months to take them on a journey. I'm considering this. Some of the conversations I have with my management team is, guys, I'm the startup guy. There are going to be better people involved in this business for the next stage of growth, better for you, better for everyone. You need to incentivize them. You can give them some deal bonuses and stuff like that to get you there and help you get there. But to do this solely on your own you're probably only going to get acquired by another trade buyer who's going to be happy to get rid of your team and stuff like that. That's basic economics. Is you want loads of demand, right? For your business to get the right price. So you have to communicate with a select bunch of people. Now, that select bunch of people might be one person, might be your FD, might be your COO, might be your business partner, but there is definitely more than one. And you need to start that process immediately, and then you need to put together a project plan, which is what do we need to achieve before we sell? Well, the most important thing is to start forecasting correctly. Yeah. It sounds quite basic, but I don't know more than 5% of the businesses I'm involved in that know how to forecast correctly. Right? Because what will happen when you get due diligence done on you is they will look back for the last 2 years where the board minutes, forecasting, and go, well, how can we believe the future? Have they predicted this in the past, and did they achieve it? So you need to start to work out how to start to under forecast and over deliver rather than over forecast and under deliver, which is what most of us do. And then there are some simple tasks like board minutes. When you go into a board meeting and have no intention of other people reading those minutes, you would have minuted stuff that you wouldn't have minuted if they were going to be read by others. So you need to really start thinking about board meetings, about what do we communicate, what do we say, and what do we document going forward, to make sure that you have a really clean set of management documents going along that process. And then, are there any silly things in the business? Do we have bonus structures that a buyer wouldn't like? That stuff needs to all be reshaped. Don't think you can sell the problem. You've got to do all of this hard work on that journey. And while all this is going on, you've got to go out and find yourself an advisor. You've got to meet a bunch of advisors. They're all brilliant salespeople, by the way. So they'll all tell you get you more money for your business than the next person, and you should choose them because they know your industry better. The reality is, selling a business is basic economic supply and demand. You want someone to spread the net really wide. You always think you're going to know your buyer. My understanding or my experience has been that you don't. Someone will come out of the woodwork that you didn't even think of. So choose your advisor based upon who you can work with. Do I like this guy or girl? Do I honestly believe I can spend some time in a room with them? Because when things are going to get challenging, but also, how far can they spread the net? So, the advisors that I work with on multiple deals now, I know that they go completely international, because sometimes simply the exchange rate is the reason that people will do a deal, because the dollar's strong right now or the yen is weak right now, and so don't forget about those. And if you think about public listed companies, which do end up doing a lot of these acquisitions because they rely on it for their own growth, most public listed companies trade at anywhere between a multiple of 15 to sort of 35 times their profit. So if they buy you for a multiple of 12, they've made 20% on that overnight, right? So they're good, really, really good buyers. So don't discount them. So you want to spread the net wide. You want to spread it to foreign territories so that you can deal with the currency benefits and fluctuations. And you want to choose an advisor that you can sit in a room with when things aren't looking that great, because deals they're tough. They're tough. And make a decision if you're going to sell to private equity or or trade, and are you going to open up to a bunch of them? And then I guess my biggest tip, and it's one that I live by every day myself, is when I appoint advisors, I only appoint advisors that represent entrepreneurs selling businesses solely. I never appoint advisors that work for both buyers and sellers, because the reality is that private equity organizations have such strong relationships with these people that you can't ever expect them to be your best wingman or wing girl in any negotiations, because they know that the private equity company that's bidding for you is likely to give them 5 other jobs in the next 12 months. You as a sole entrepreneur may only ever sell one company in your life. So try and go with a selling advisor only. Choose them based upon, can I work with this person? Can I spend time with them? And ensure that they spread the net really, really far. And then let the process happen. So I guess you know, I know a lot of friends, and I meet a lot of people that have had failed deals. I don't quite understand how that happens myself, because if you get yourself in order, be confident in basic economics, which is, if I spread the net far enough and I get more than X bidders, and you can make up what number that is. For me, on both businesses, I said I wanted more than 5 bidders. Then I will sell to the highest bidder, because I know that in basic economic terms, I'm getting the fair value for my business. That's quite difficult, because we always have a value in mind. You've got to get rid of, you can have a value in mind, but you've got to go down to basic economics of supply and demand, which is, as long as I've got a number of people bidding for this, then I've got to accept that the highest bid is the fair value for this business, and I will sell for that. And advisors want to hear that too, because they don't want foul deals. So when you appoint your advisor, saying, by the way, as long as you bring me 10 bidders and they submit 10 bids, I will be selling for the highest bid, so you will get paid. They love that, because they're working with some certainty.
Yeah, that's been so practically useful. So, you know, just to pull some of that together, I think, you know, it's a case of not making assumptions when you go into this in terms of who your buyer actually is and their rationale. You know, it can often be in the private equity world, you're part of a platform build. You've mentioned the importance of arbitrage there, in terms of, you know, they will offer you 10, but actually immediately they pay 10. The, you know, the 3.5 million EBITDA is worth 15 on the day that they've actually bought it, because of the you know, the multiple that they're already realizing. So, you know, don't make assumptions around that. Be understanding of the power that arbitrage plays in this. Get your advisory team right. Understand that this is an asset. A bit like I always see the analogy of a house. You know, people have a notion of what their house is worth, but it's only, and you can look at the brochures of other houses, you know, in the neighborhood and all of that good stuff. It gives an indication, but it's only ever worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. And I suppose leading on from that, there's 3 elements to this question, but is there anything that has tripped you up in the past? Do you have any regrets in terms of decisions that you've made? And are there resources that you would signpost people to support them in this process?
It's not a regret, but I was approached in my first business. I was approached by our largest competitor to acquire us, and I entertained those conversations. And they submitted a bid at the time of I'll get the numbers slightly wrong, but it was around £11 million. And I was at that stage when I wasn't that confident in what I was doing, and I accepted that offer, and I responded to them via my lawyer. We never heard back from them, and I regretted at the time not chasing them and saying, "Hey, you wanted to buy it, what's going on?" But instead, I was like, "Well, they haven't come back to me. I wasn't very confident. Maybe they didn't want to buy it in the end, etc., etc." Somewhat 6 years later, I bumped into the chief exec after I sold the business for 40 odd million, and he said, "You were right not to take our offer, weren't you?" And I said, "I did take your offer." And he said, "We didn't hear back from you." And I was like, You did hear back from me. We wrote back to you, you know, we played it cool. We wrote to them back to them a bit late and stuff like that. And he was like, we never received it.
Wow.
Now, that's a good news story now,
Yeah.
but can you imagine if I'd gone bust or something? All because I was too proud to call and chase and go, hey, I accepted your offer. We're going to do this deal or not? Because people were telling me, lawyers were saying, no, you never chase them. You know, if you chase them, they'll. But in hindsight, it worked out a brilliant thing, right?
Sure.
I made 40 odd rather than 11, but it could have been the other way around. So don't appoint advisors and then sit there. Still trust that gut and still do what's right for you. I think is an important message out there. And for resources, I'm really glad to see that for the first time ever, I've seen a course arrive, which is Get Ready for Sale. At Cranfield School of Management, to also undertake a number of other courses. But I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of these coming forward, because there's a lot of courses on startups, there's a lot of courses on scale ups, there's not many courses on sell up. And I would like to see that. I would like to see people start to think about selling their business during the scale stage and learning about how to sell it through an institution or an online program and stuff like that. So I've started to see it, and I've only started to see it in the last few months because I've been looking at a project, which is an online business school elsewhere in the US. But I think that's a great thing. I think people should hunt down some of these programs that are available. Some of it will just be mastermind type talks and stuff like that, but really engage in that stuff a year or so before you might even want to sell the business. But there's nothing wrong with learning about the process, what the good things are, what the bad things are, how long things take, how much things cost. And then the strongest piece of advice I can give is pay for professional experts where required. I've got a really good friend who's on his third failed deal because he refuses to employ the right type of lawyers to get him through the deal, and it's a real shame because he desperately wants to sell. And it falls over every time because he's unwilling to spend 100 grand on lawyers. And lawyers do unfortunately cost you 100 grand plus to sell a business, and they cost that if the business is worth 5 million or 50 million. It's just 100 odd grand. That's what it is. But don't get it wrong. Another problem with getting it wrong is I've also got friends where they've sold a business and later on they get a warranty claim. So they've now bought their new house, they've bought their wife a Range Rover, their wife has bought her husband a Range Rover, and then all of a sudden they get a warranty claim saying we want 5 million quid back. That's a miserable place to be. So make sure you pay for the right advice, insure against warranties, which you can. Cost you 1% of your sale price to insure against any potential warranty claim. Just do that stuff. Do it. Because there's nothing more valuable than being able to wake up with a clear mind in the morning. You don't want to sell your business and be waiting for a potential warranty claim.
Yeah.
Which is a potential.
It's great advice. And for completion then, has anything tripped you up in the past? Has that warranties, for example, insuring against the warranties tripped you up, or is there anything like that has, and you've learned from that in subsequent exits?
No, so I have had something trip me up. I've had nothing trip me up on warranty claims or anything like that. I've always been very transparent and very well planned and very well executed on that, and paid for the right advice. One of the things that did trip me up actually in business, number one, is that my chief commercial officer, I had started to train to take over for me. I wanted to exit the business on day one and not have to stay for an earnout. So I had my chief commercial officer get him ready to take over my role, and I had incentivized him with a cash bonus upon the deal being done. What then happened is once we started to get into stage 3 or stage 4 of negotiations with the buyer, he ended up quite strong-willed in his ability to negotiate more of what he wanted from the new buyer. So he was and this is again, the numbers will be wrong, and they're wrong for good reason. But let's say he was on £200,000 a year. I had done a deal with him that he would take over my role as CEO. He would stay on 200 grand a year, but he'd get 100 grand bonus when the deal was done, or something along those lines. He got a couple of weeks away from the negotiations, and he came to me and said, well, I want the new owner to pay me 300 grand a year, to be honest with you, etc., etc. Now, this one person was stood between me and the deal taking place. And the amount of energy I spent on this was just unrealistic compared to the 40 odd million pound deal we were doing. And I was flying to and from Tokyo to get this deal done. And this guy's driving me mad. The new buyer's going, is this guy on board? Is he not on board? And I was lucky that the buyer was very pragmatic. And they said to me, I said, I want to go back and I want to fire him, but I'll stay for 6 months and I will appoint you a chief exec, and I will make sure that that CEO is the right person personally before I step down. And I was very lucky that I had a good buyer who said, okay, let's do this. And they wanted the business, but that one person could have made that deal fall over. And I would have been at that stage, probably £500,000 of costs in. So that would have been an uncomfortable environment. So do make sure that you don't have a potential terrorist amongst the team. That's gonna have an unfair value over what's going to be taking place. And money changes people, right? It's an awful thing, but people don't he's been there for a few years. He's like, well, I'm going to get 100 grand and a better job title. You're about to get 40 million. He didn't realize I'd been there for 14 years and started it and put everything, my house was on the line, my car was on the line. I was still living in a rented house, etc., etc. But I've learned from that, and I've learned that you can't, it's not that simple to trust what people are saying around you. You need to build a business that's robust enough that someone's going to buy it regardless of this one individual, these two individuals. We touched base on it earlier on. If you communicate about it, do you run the risk of them leaving? If your business is reliant that heavily on one or two people, you're going to struggle to sell it anyway. You need to be showing how you're dampening their power, not allowing it to increase.
Thank you for sharing that. There's so much value in your experience. You referenced something along the way there, which we hadn't spoken about just before we move into the close, but it would be remiss for me not to pick it up. You talked about an earnout. For those who are not familiar with earnout, if you can just share what that is, and also whether you now exit cleanly, you know your figure, that's the figure, and that you clean that on exit. So can you share a little bit of insight in terms of your own experience now? Just for those who are not familiar with an earnout, if you can explain what that is, Jamie, and then what's your opinion now on earnouts as part of the exit compensation?
Yeah, so an earnout is very frequently used in private equity buyers, but seen more and more in trade buyers now too. And what it is they're saying, well, you're expecting us to buy you on what you're saying is going to happen in the future. So we will give you part of the value now, and we want you to either hang around, or whoever you've appointed, that star guy over there that you said is right for the job, once he delivers those numbers, we'll give you the rest of your money. And if he doesn't deliver those numbers, we won't give you the rest of your money. And generally you get the decision. You either stay and deliver it yourself, or you allow your new management team to deliver it. Most entrepreneurs decide to stay and deliver it themselves because they've got a strong belief in their own ability over other people's ability. But the problem with earnouts is externalities happen, like a pandemic. And all of a sudden you're like, well, it's not my fault. And they're like, well, the document didn't allow for this. So you might have 10 million quid being held back. Let's say you sold for 30 million. It's traditionally they try and hold back around 20-25%. So they're holding 20-25% back. They're expecting you to deliver these numbers over the next 2 years. You don't deliver them for whatever reason. There's a pandemic, there's an earthquake, the summer was too hot that year, and your business requires seasonalities of winters. There's always something. You don't deliver the numbers, you don't get any of your money. And from my experience, I've heard lots and lots and lots of horror stories. Now, the horror stories are always like those mean private equity guys they did me over. From my experience, having listened to many of these stories, it's normally that it's just quite simply that entrepreneurs aren't that good at being managers, right? And you've got to face it that when the private equity company owns your company now, you are a manager and you need to behave differently. So from my experience, listening to the stories, it's normally the entrepreneur that's got it wrong, not the mean private equity guys. But whoever's to blame, the general principle is you don't want an earnout. You want to take your money up front, unless you can write yourself a really decent earnout. So I have had an earnout in one of my organizations, but I wrote it as a put option, which meant that I left roughly 3 million quid behind. And I said to them that if the business doesn't do any better, then you give me the £3 million back. I was going to stay for 2 years. If it does better, every £1 over what better is, you will give me £4 in return. So I couldn't lose, but I could win. And that gave me an incentive to stay and do. I turned that 3 million quid into 9 million, I think, in about 18 months. So that was a good earnout. But it's not often you can find a buyer who's willing to take, not have any, allow you to have no downside risk, right? But they did because they were desperate to keep me. But the general principle is if you're going to leave, right? Have a clean exit and get out, because entrepreneurs aren't good managers.
Yeah. Moving from employer to employee doesn't typically suit them.
And just things go wrong, right? I mean, what happens? So your new owner says to you, we would like you to move out of your offices in Croydon and move to bank because, we've got other clients in bank and it's easier for us. And you move your offices from Croydon to bank, your rent's gone up by 400 grand a year. And you're having to go back around a table and say to them, well, I want to add back this 400 grand because it's not fair. And you'll spend the next 3 years talking about if you should buy fruit for the office anymore rather than focusing on growing the business. So earnouts are to be avoided.
Great advice. Jimmy, before we move into the close, conscious of time, I mean, literally the time has flown. This has been a real masterclass in many different facets of starting up, scaling up, and selling up. I love that. I haven't heard that put like that before. Actually, when we just talk about sell up, I'll give a nod to a good friend of mine, Nick Bradley, who hosts the Scale Up podcast, and Nick has been around private equity for a long time, and certainly if people are thinking of exiting, Nick is somebody they should have a look at in terms of his material. And another wonderful guy who will be coming onto the podcast, Mac Lackey, who runs a company called Exit DNA, an American guy. So is there anything else before we close that you feel the listeners should know in the context of what we've been speaking about?
There's one other point in particular onto selling, which is to not underestimate the value of vendor due diligence. So another thing that makes a lot of deals fall over is when you sell a business, generally everyone throws in their offers, 5 million, 6 million, 7 million, and then you invite them to come to the next stage, which is you allow them to come into your building and start digging into the detail to see if they can stand by their offer or increase their offer or decrease their offer. And at that stage, you tend to get a lot of people drop off because the sales document that you put together wasn't as transparent as what they now perceive it to be. The problem with that is all of the bidders have now spending money on due diligence. So they're probably spending between 100 and 150 grand on PwC, Deloitte, or someone like that to come and do that piece of the work for them. Which means what happens is when you initially go out for sale, you restrict the amount of people that bid in the first place because they're like, do I, deal costs? Do I really want to buy this company, et cetera, et cetera. What I've done with each of the organizations I've sold is I've done what is called vendor due diligence. So you go to one of a good firm of auditors like PwC, Deloitte, or Grant Thornton or someone, and you say, I want you to do the due diligence on me like you're acting on behalf of a buyer. And they come and do that, and they produce you a vendor due diligence report, which means that when you send out your initial we're for sale pack, you offer it with your vendor due diligence, which now means that people's deal costs are nil, which means you get more buyers, you get more bids. And what do we get if we get more bids? If we've got more demand, we get more money. So you end up with more people coming to the table, and you end up with more people staying at the table in the next round. So to give you an example, on our first company that we put up for sale, we had 16 bidders. So yes, it cost me 120 grand to do some vendor DD, but I probably wouldn't have got 5. And the basic economics tells you that the greater the demand, the more you're going to receive. And by the way, the lowest bid in those 16 bidders was around 10 to 12 million. I can't remember the exact details. The highest was 44.
Wow.
Yes, it cost me 120 grand. It was 120 grand well spent. And also it means that when you commit to a buyer, their own due diligence is going to be a very thin layer on top of the due diligence report they've already obtained. So in our instance, they appointed the same organization, which I think was Deloitte. And Deloitte Tokyo did a 4-day piece of due diligence just to top up the due diligence report that they had already received from Deloitte London before they were able to stand behind their figures. So vendor due diligence is costly. It brings more people to the table. Basic economics tells you that the more the demand, the higher the price. And also it secures a better opportunity for your deal completing, because the skeletons are laid to bear in the initial communication with the potential buyers.
Jamie, this is why I love listening to podcasts as a way of learning and hosting podcasts, hosting wonderful people like yourself. The value in the last 5 minutes alone is just huge for anyone who's embarking in this process. So thank you. You have lived such a wonderful life full of rich experiences. And we didn't even get into the Imps Motorcycle Display Team, the work you're doing with the Prince's Trust. I encourage people to go and grab your book and learn a little bit more about you. We'll come to how to connect with you. Can you share with our listeners, you're such a wise guy for kind of the 44 years that you have, you know, you strike me as somebody who is so grounded, who really gets this, who has an understanding of money and you know, to leverage the best of it, but be careful of how it can change you and everything else. Can you share with our listeners 3 timeless takeaways?
So be kind, because you know it's like I said, it's a regret of mine from an earlier stage in life, but it will pay dividends to be kind for as long as humanly possible. So the sooner you understand that, the more rewards that will pay back. Continuously learn. I undertake courses for anything and everything. I really do. If there's a course to be done, if there is a coach to be employed, then make sure you do that. And the third one I think is probably the most important, which is a saying my mum used to say to me over and over again, which is love and confidence is all a child needs to succeed. And I believe that is the truth, not just for children, but for adults too. So believe in yourself, have confidence in yourself, but also try and believe in others. And if you can give one person today, I test everybody that's listening or watching this to take in the next 5 hours to go and purposefully try and install confidence in someone, in their wife, in their child, in their friend, in their mother. Pick up the phone if you don't see them in person. But the reward that person will get from it may be just the thing that changes their life forever.
Again, that's so profound. I always say to entrepreneurs, certainly those leaders who are coaching, or we're coaching within our own program, you know, your vision will require belief. The belief will require confidence, and that confidence needs evidence. And essentially what you're saying here, you can imbue your team with confidence by calling out something, by evidencing something that they have done that maybe you haven't previously called it out. So again, just so profound. Jamie, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been packed with so much value. We'll repurpose this, and it'll go out in lots across lots of different mediums. What's next for you? You mentioned you're writing another book, and another one in the kind of in the thought process is marinating up above. But what's next for you?
So the main one for me is, I touched base on it earlier on. I was really fortunate. Just recently came back from NECA, spent some time with Richard Branson, and him and I were talking about dyslexia, ADHD, and the association with sleeping difficulties, etc. So I'm about 25% of the way into my new book, The Dyslexic Entrepreneur, subtitle, What Everyone Can Learn from Thinking Differently. And, really for the next few months, my energy is going behind helping those that suffer with dyslexia understand that they should see it as a superpower, and those that don't suffer with dyslexia, that employing a dyslexic thinker may be beneficial to their organization. And then outside of that, I'm really focused at the moment actually on entrepreneurship, startup, and education across Africa, India, and other places around the world. And I'm thinking about, you touch base, I'm currently chair of the Princess Trust Enterprise Network. My role comes to an end on the 1st of July. I've been spending 65% of my time there for the last 3 years. So I'm looking at where I spend 65% of my time for the next 3 years, and I'm hoping to do that in startup education across the globe.
Amazing. Jamie, if people want to connect with you and learn a little bit more, which I have no doubt they will, where best to reach you?
Go to my website, jamiewaller.com or .co.uk, and find me there.
Super. Look, you really are one of the good guys. It's a real privilege to host you today. I wish you all the very best with everything that you're doing, and continue to scale with purpose. Take care.
Thank you.